So this will be the second of the pre-recorded lectures regarding the nervous system, and we're going to be picking up on the autonomic nervous system. Of course, in the Martini book, this is chapter 14, not 15. But let's talk about this, and we're only going to go through about 20 or so slides on the autonomic nervous system. There will be some at the end that we will not be covering. So the autonomic nervous system, this is that portion of the nervous system that is basically governing all of your involuntary actions. So this is your smooth muscle, your cardiac muscle, and your glandular secretions. Now, the autonomic nervous system, remember, is just a portion of the overall nervous system. And we saw when we started with the whole unit on the nervous system that the autonomic nervous system is a part of your motor side of the nervous system, and that it's going to the involuntary effectors like cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, and glands. And you also saw in the spinal cord that these fibers, these autonomic fibers, are running through your skeletal nerves, your spinal nerves as well. Now, what the autonomic nervous system is primarily concerned with is much of your homeostasis. It's going to work largely with the endocrine system to maintain your homeostasis by maintaining your blood levels and your blood pressures and things like that. Now, there's two parts to the autonomic nervous system. You've heard of them. The fight or flight response, which is sometimes referred to as the sympathetic division, and then there is the rest and digest, which is the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, during sympathetic division, when you are in fight or flight response and you are prepared to fight or to run, your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure goes up, your respiration goes up, you get goosebumps. Your skin becomes more pale because all the blood has been shunted away from your skin and going toward your internal organs. And other organ systems like your digestive system, the urinary system, would have reduced blood flow. So there's going to be this rheostat. Some systems will get more and some systems will get less. Now, when I'm looking at these abbreviations, we need to be really careful. SNS and ANS. Here, SNS is the somatic nervous system versus the autonomic nervous system. These are the two components of the motor side of the nervous system. Remember that the SNS, the somatic side, is dealing with your conscious control, that is, controlling your voluntary skeletal muscle, whereas the autonomic nervous system is dealing with your involuntary responses, your smooth muscle. Think about it, your smooth muscle is around your digestive organs, it's around your blood vessels, it's also controlling your respiration and blood pressure. Now, the somatic nervous system uses both somatic sensory and somatic motor neurons to conduct information from a receptor, such as in the skin, and then, as we know, it's going to go out to skeletal muscle fibers. Autonomic nervous system also utilizes both sensory and motor neurons, but it would be now the visceral sensory side. So the autonomic nervous system is largely receiving sensory information from your viscera. That is, again, from your internal organs, things like temperature of your skin, temperature of your organs, how much light there is, how tense your muscles are, what's the state of glandular secretion. All this information is coming into your visceral sensory side and is being dealt with through the autonomic motor side. Now, there's a significant wiring or significant circuitry difference when comparing these two portions. So on the left is the somatic nervous system. And this is the scenario we've been seeing over and over and over up till now. So in your skin, you have receptors. Here's your afferent or your sensory neuron. It's coming up through the spinal nerve. There's the cell body for that neuron, that sensory neuron. It's a unipolar in shape. Comes in, synapses with interneurons, and then those interneurons would then send signals out, motor neurons, out the anterior root and to the skeletal muscle, right? This is voluntary skeletal muscle. When you're dealing with the autonomic nervous system, there's a slight difference here, rather significant actually, in that there's a two-neuron system. There's going to be what we call the pre-ganglionic and post-ganglionic neuron. So again, here we have sensory information coming from the lung. Right now, you're not aware of it, but your lungs are sending signals to your central nervous system about how they're doing. So the signals are coming up. This is your afferent. This is all the same. Comes in, all the same, all the same. So on the sensory side, everything looks the same. Here's where it's different. In the outgoing motor neuron, it's going to go from the lateral horn of the spinal cord. It's going to travel out the anterior root, and it's not going to go all the way to the effector. Instead, that neuron is only going to go as far as the ganglion. Remember, a ganglion is a cluster of cell bodies found in the peripheral nervous system. So here in that ganglion, that preganglionic neuron is going to synapse with another neuron, the postganglionic neuron. So there's a second neuron that's then going to carry the signal from the ganglion to the effector. In this case, we're back to smooth muscle of the lung and the trachea. So the real significant difference here is this two neuron system on the motor side. This is a great table. Definitely recommend that you spend a few minutes looking at the details of this. Sorry, I got a little impatient in the pushing forward. So in this table, what you're looking at is a beautiful comparison of the somatic nervous system with the autonomic nervous system. So somatic versus autonomic, and it goes through what type of control is it? Well, we know that the somatic is voluntary, whereas the autonomic is involuntary. What type of effector do we have? Well, on the somatic side, that's going to be skeletal muscle. We know that's voluntary, whereas on the autonomic side, you're going to have cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, and glands. When we think about the wiring of the system, how many neurons are involved on the motor side? Only one in the somatic nervous system. But as we saw, there are going to be two neurons, the preganglionic and, it doesn't say the word post here, but the postganglionic neuron. When the somatic nervous system sends a signal to skeletal muscle, all it does is excite. So all the skeletal muscle can do is receive the nerve impulse and therefore cause the muscle to shorten. Whereas in the autonomic nervous system, what we're going to see is that the signal can either excite the muscle or it can inhibit the muscle. We can actually cause the heart rate to go up or the heart rate to go down, the respiration rate to go up or the respiration to go down. When it comes to neurotransmitters, the only neurotransmitter we've discussed up to this point has been acetylcholine, and that is the most common neurotransmitter in your body and is the one used by your skeletal system. But acetylcholine is also used, I should say, in the autonomic nervous system. But when it comes to the sympathetic response, you're also going to see norepinephrine used. You've heard of epinephrine. Norepinephrine is very similar. Lastly, when you're thinking about the myelination of the axons, in the somatic nervous system, you're dealing with myelinated, thick, and very fast signals. Remember that if the axon is myelinated, it will speed up the signal. However, in the autonomic nervous system, what we're going to see is that the preganglionic axons are actually thin and myelinated, so a little bit slower. But even more amazingly, the postganglionic axons are going to be unmyelinated, giving them an even slower speed of the action conduction, the action potential, or the nerve conduction. Now, at first, this may seem awkward. Why would the autonomic nervous system be slower? But with this slowness, with this relative slowness, comes greater control. So thinking about this two neuron system, looking at this picture, we can see both neurons. So the preganglionic axon leaving from the spinal cord, goes out only as far as the ganglion. We'll talk about where that ganglion is in a moment. And then here we synapse with the postganglionic axon, which then goes to the effector. This is going to use acetylcholine, and this is going to use acetylcholine as well, unless it's a sympathetic, and then it's going to use norepinephrine. Another way of thinking about this, if I were taking a flight from Indianapolis or from Grand Rapids, and I was going to Miami, I might first have to stop at a hub. Think of the hub, like Chicago, as being the ganglion. So I would have to stop and change planes, if you will. So the Indianapolis to Chicago flight would represent the preganglionic, whereas the postganglionic fiber would represent the flight down to Miami. So at the very end of chapter 11, I introduced the fact that neurons are arranged in different patterns within our body. And I mentioned neuronal convergence and divergence. I would just want you to think back to that slide. It was the very last slide of the first chapter regarding the nervous system. And I compared and contrasted the convergence pattern with the divergence pattern. Well, converge, right, is when numerous preganglionic cells would then synapse or converge onto a single one. So you've got lots of signals coming in, and they're all converging onto one. Okay, so that would be more of a convergent pathway, and that's happening. You have a lot of sensory information coming in from your body, and it's converging onto a central location in your nervous system. But there's also divergence. That is, one cell is now going to other cells, and they're telling their friends, and that's basically what happens when you consider the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight response, right? You've got one signal telling three other neurons, which then tell all their friends, and very, very quickly, right, we spread. So this would be a divergent pathway. So let's get back to the different divisions of the autonomic nervous system. We'll start off with, again, these two parts, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic and the parasympathetic divisions. Now, what we'll be doing throughout the rest of this conversation is comparing and contrasting these. And that will be your job primarily too, will be to compare and contrast the parasympathetic with the sympathetic. They both are similar in that they both use the two neuron system. They both use the pre and the postganglionic neuron. They both use that ganglion in between. They are both involuntary, and they both are involved with maintaining your internal environment. However, what we're going to see is that each of these divisions, sympathetic and parasympathetic, works quite differently and has different functions. Let's start off now with the parasympathetic division. Just a few facts about it. The parasympathetic division is also referred to as the craniosacral division, and you'll see why that is in a moment. This side of the autonomic nervous system is mostly involved with rest and digest, or with conserving energy and replenishing your nutrient stores. It is most active when you are at rest, and therefore the rest and digest nickname for this division. It's going to work along with the sympathetic nervous system to help maintain overall body homeostasis. Versus the sympathetic division. The sympathetic division, you're going to know it as the thoracolumbar division. And this division is primarily preparing the body for emergencies, and hence the name fight or flight. When there is increased sympathetic activity, the body will be on high alert, ready for some sort of fight or flight response. So let's talk about some of the differences in these two. So those are some of the similarities. I mentioned craniosacral and thoracolumbar. What else is different? Well, where the cell bodies are found is different, and we'll look at that. So there's different regions of the CNS. Parasympathetic neurons are going to originate either from the brainstem, cranium, right, or from the sacral region. That's why, that should be cranial, not carnio, but that's why it's called the craniosacral division. Think of para places, but think para, right? A para places, and that's the parasympathetic division. Whereas the sympathetic division is going to originate from the thoracic and lumbar regions. Again, that's why this is called the thoracolumbar division. So you can see here the reason for the names. So the craniosacral division, the parasympathetic nervous system, you can see is coming from the green areas. Again, a para places, and this involves, and this is important, that it involves cranial nerves 3, 7, 9, and 10. The thoracolumbar, or the sympathetic division, is originating from the thoracic and lumbar regions. So what are some other differences? Well, the parasympathetic nervous system is actually structurally more simple than the sympathetic, and it is true that both use preganglionic fibers that are myelinated, and both use relatively large diameter preganglionic fibers, and both use postganglionic axons, which are unmyelinated and relatively smaller. So that is a similarity. But the difference is that in the parasympathetic nervous system, you have relatively long preganglionic axons with short postganglionic, with very little branching, whereas the sympathetic nervous system uses very short preganglionic axons, longer postganglionic, with much more branching. And I'll make this more clear in a moment. So here is a cartoon representation of the neurons. On the top, the parasympathetic nervous system. Again, note that there's a very long preganglionic axon. Note that it is myelinated. Now, this neuron, where would it originate? Correct. The cell body for that would be either in the cranium or in the sacral region, right? And we see that it comes to the ganglion, and that the postganglionic fiber is relatively short and is unmyelinated. Conversely, for the sympathetic nervous system, you have a relatively short preganglionic fiber. It has a lot of branching. Now, where would this cell body be located? Correct. That cell body would be located in the thoracolumbar region. And then you have a relatively longer postganglionic axon. Again, note that it is unmyelinated. Another difference is, where is the ganglion? So for the parasympathetic division, the ganglia are considered terminal. That is, they're very, very close to the end, near the target organ, or they're actually intramural. That means that they're located within the wall. So intramural, within the wall of the target organ. This is a fantastic comparative chart. So it's going to compare the parasympathetic with the sympathetic divisions. It's going to remind you of the functions, rest and digest versus fight or flight. Where do they come from? Oh, craniosacral versus thoracolumbar. What kind of ganglia, what's the location? For parasympathetic, they're terminal or intramural. Whereas for the sympathetic, I haven't shown this to you, but the ganglia here are the prevertebral, or what's called the sympathetic trunk ganglia. Divergence, not very much at all, parasympathetic. Extensive divergence, that is spreading of the fibers for the sympathetic division. The length of the preganglionic axons is long for the parasympathetic and short for the sympathetic, and reverse it for the postganglionic axons. Again, where are the ganglia located? in the target organ or in the wall near the target organ. And for the sympathetic system, we're dealing with the ganglia that are right along the vertebral column. And don't worry about the rami. So again, I mentioned to you in the previous slide that there were 4 cranial nerves involved with the parasympathetic nervous system, 3, 7, 9, and 10. And you know a little bit about what these do. 3 was involved with constricting the pupils. 7 and 9 are involved in taste and salivary secretions, nasal secretions. And 10, recall, is the one that's wandering down to the digestive organs, the heart, the lungs. Now I want you to think about what's happening during a parasympathetic moment. You're resting, you're digesting, your pupils are more constricted. You are preparing for a meal, so you're creating more saliva, your taste buds are ready to go, and the vagus nerve, which wanders down to the heart, tells the heart to slow down, tells the respiration to relax, tells the digestive systems to get busy in preparation of the meal. Now, not only do you have those 4 cranial nerves, but you also have some sacral nerves, and the sacral nerves are going to be going down to the intestines. Again, think digestion, down to the reproductive organs, and down to the bladder. So again, during parasympathetic, you have increased function in reproduction, urinary, and GI system. And so you see that these cranial nerves are involved with those rest and digest responses, and that the sacral nerves are involved with the systems that we know are upregulated during parasympathetic moments. That parasympathetic innervation causes an increase in smooth muscle motility, and this will be important for emptying the bladder, important for moving digestive products through the digestive tract, and will be important also for maintenance of the erection of the clitoris and the penis. Here's a great picture of the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, it doesn't say that, so add it up here. This is parasympathetic nervous system. Again, what's going on? You've got nerves coming from the cranium, cranial nerves 3, 7, 9, and 10, as well as nerves coming from the sacral region. What are these nerves telling the body to do? Increase tear production, increase salivation, slow down the heart, narrow the airways, slow down the respiration rate, but increase digestion, increase motility of the GI system, increase urine filtration, increase bladder, increase the ability for the erection of the reproductive organs. So again, you're seeing some things increase, like salivation, and you're seeing other things decrease, like the heart rate. Remember, I told you that the sympathetic nervous system could, in the parasympathetic nervous system, all of the autonomic nervous system has the ability of controlling either negatively or positively the body's responses. Now, the parasympathetic division is most active, as we've said, during the times of rest and digest, when we're processing nutrients and conserving energy. There is less divergence, as we've described, and therefore there's less mass activation. In other words, you do not have to turn on all portions of the parasympathetic nervous system at once. It's more discrete, it's more localized. This is in contrast to the sympathetic nervous system, where when the bear walks in the room, when you're scared, all systems go on to full alert. The parasympathetic nervous system does not require that. So it's more discrete, more localized. You can turn on pieces of it without turning on all of it. One way of thinking about that is that you can, and that may be a little bit crude, but it gets the point across, you can salivate without having an erection. So you don't have to have both functions at the same time. Now, the sympathetic nervous system is more complex. It has more divergence. Again, it's coming from the thoracolumbar regions. And as you're appreciating, the preganglionic axons come out from the spinal column in the thoracolumbar regions and only have to go a short distance to the ganglion, which is right along the vertebra. So again, the preganglionic fiber is relatively short because the ganglion is right along the vertebral column, and those ganglia appear like a bead of a string of beads or pearls along the spinal cord. So if you look at any image of the spinal cord, you will see next to it the ganglia on each side. Now there are some of these ganglia are along the spinal column, and so there are some of these ganglia up in the cervical region as well as down along the thoracic and lumbar regions. This represents the last slide that I'm going to present for the autonomic nervous system, and this is the SNS, the sympathetic nervous system. Again, these fibers are coming from thoracolumbar. Notice there's a very short preganglionic fiber just going to the ganglia that are located right next to the vertebra. That is in contrast, I didn't point it out, but that is in contrast to the parasympathetic nervous system, where there was a very, very long preganglionic and a very short postganglionic fiber. What are these fibers doing? Well, they're going to the eye, telling the pupil to get larger, dilate, telling the saliva to decrease. You get a dry mouth when you're scared. Telling the heart to increase its rate, telling the airways to increase, telling the respiration rate to go up, but telling the liver, the digestive system, the intestines, the kidneys, and the reproductive systems, no, right? It's actually decreasing all of the functions here. It also causes your hair to rise up on your skin and your blood to go away from your surface of your skin so you become more pale in color. The rest of this you may absolutely skip over, and there's no reason to go any further beyond the second image there. But I would like you to go up and look really quick. Just compare these two images. This was the parasympathetic, and I didn't say it earlier, and I'll say it again. The pre-ganglionic fiber is very long, and way over here is where the ganglion is. Remember I told you the ganglion was near or at the organ, intramural or terminal. So it's going a long ways before it gets to the ganglion, and then the second neuron is much, much shorter. So this ends the presentation on the autonomic nervous system. Two short videos, one on the, actually I'll combine these, but there'll be one video combining the cranial nerves and the autonomic nervous system that I'll now post on YouTube.